Welcome to our virtual class on retirement planning essentials for people age 50 and over that have $1 million plus in savings. I don't expect to be able to cover everything, but I do think this will really help you drill in on some very impactful strategies, ideas, and concepts that can provide meaningful value today as you start or enhance your retirement planning journey. Let's talk about the retirement planning landscape as we sit here in 2026. What does it look like? When surveyed, well over 70% of people say they're going to retire after the age of 70. But the reality is, over 70% of people retire before the age of 70. It's actually before the age of 65. So when you look at it from a holistic perspective, people are retiring younger. And the reason for that is all the things you might think about: a change in their health, a change in their spouse's health, something with their kids, job downsizing, age discrimination, artificial intelligence enabled job displacement, those types of things. Here's your package, walk out the door, thanks for your 40 years. People were planning to work until 65, 67, 70, but then they're actually having to retire at 60 or 62, either because they have to or because they want to. But the reality is, people are retiring quite a bit earlier than they expect. And based off that, when you combine longer life expectancy, people can now expect to be retired for 25, 30, even 40 years. So the reality is, that's a long time that you're not going to be earning a paycheck, and that you need to have a plan to substitute that paycheck. And that's where retirement planning really gets incredibly important, to make sure that what you're doing is going to be sustainable for the early, middle, and later chapters of this next big cycle in your life. I've been doing this for 15 years. We exclusively and only work with people age 50 and up as they're going through these retirement planning challenges, when they're getting closer to it, transitioning into it, and well beyond it. I can tell you from experience, because I've seen these different stages, that these three different phases of retirement really have a lot of truth to them. The reality is that people want to build in flexibility and choice into their financial plan, the ability to pivot if they want to. Maybe they have a plan, they think they're set on it, but things happen and things change, and you want to be able to pivot or change that plan if something calls for it, or if you just change your mind. These three different retirement phases. The go-go years. This is when you first retire, when you're likely going to spend the most amount of money. It's all these trips and experiences, things like that, that you never had time to do when you were spending all of your time working right before you retired. So oftentimes we see spending elevated in the beginning of retirement, and that's normal. After you've had time to do all these things, check those off the bucket list. You enter what's called the slow go years, into your 70s and your 80s, when you're still active, doing a lot of things you want to do, but you tend to start spending less money than you did when you first started retirement. And then you move into that last stage, which is what they call the no-go years. When you're mid 80s, you're slowing down, you're at home a lot more, it's a more low-key life. You're just not spending as much on things like going out or traveling or clothes, things like that. But you might have a healthcare event. So we do have to plan for all of these different stages to maximize what retirement can be for you in those stages, but also protect you to make sure you have enough if something were to change or something happened to you later on in your life. This next chapter of retirement planning is very different from the chapter of financial planning that you've been focused on for the last 30 or 40 years, which is primarily working, saving, and building up your nest egg to make sure that you have enough one day when you retire. And you probably did some risk planning as well, diversifying what you have saved, doing basic life or disability planning to protect you against those catastrophic what ifs that could potentially have derailed your plan. So it's a really tunneled visioned approach towards financial planning, where you really know that I need to focus on building and building and building and building my savings. So one day when I retire, I can stop working and take it out and retire, right? As you get close to retirement, you have to start making decisions around all these different things that you've never had to think about before. How are you going to take a lifetime of accumulated pieces and build them in an optimized way to a plan that creates income for you that can be safely withdrawn sustainably for a 25, 30, or 40-year retirement cycle? You have RMDs, you have all the tax aspects of retirement. Most people have money saved in pre-tax buckets. How do you take that money out and reduce as much as possible what Uncle Sam is going to take and keep as much as possible for you. This change in health insurance, transition to Medicare. What if you want to retire before the age of 65? What do you do for health insurance in those cases? How you manage volatility and sequential return risk as you enter in retirement and you're now living on these savings as opposed to just saving into them. And dozens, literally dozens more of things that are specific to retirees that had no bearing on you in the years before you got to the stage of your life. That's why it takes a specialization to really understand these things and why we dug into this and established this 15 years ago, because it's always changing and we can only spend so much time being an expert on this narrow area of retirement planning. And that's what I'm going to bring to bear in this class, my specialized experience to help you understand more about these things that affect people at this stage of your life. So as you go through this class, you're going to have naturally a lot of questions. Does this apply to me? Should I do a Roth conversion? Does this strategy make sense for my healthcare before age 65? How do my tax buckets look? What are these opportunities that I have? What are these red flags that might be in my retirement plan that I don't know about? All of those are natural questions to have. And of course, I'm not going to be able to answer those questions in this type of setting. So what you can do is you can take out your phone, you can use this QR code. It'll bring you to a page where you can book a 30-minute Zoom session with me, and I'll go over your plan with you, answer all of your questions, help you as much as I possibly can. If it makes sense for us to meet again, great. I'll tell you that, and we'll book a second time. If it doesn't, I'll tell you that too, and tell you exactly what it is that you need to do, or point you in the direction that you need to go in to get the help that you need. So I think it's going to be very valuable for you, and I think you'll learn a lot, including in this class today. So, and I'll have this QR code up once or twice more so you can find that time that works for you if you do have these questions. One of the biggest risks that I think is lurking for retirees today as we stand here in 2026 is what we call the sequence of return risk. What that is the fact that markets can behave in different ways at different times. This chart on the right here is a great example of that. What it shows is two people that each have $1 million when they start. They each want to take out $50,000 a year. They each average an identical return of 6%. The difference between Mrs. Green and Mrs. Red is that the order in which those returns happened are directly inverted for Mrs. Red than they are for Mrs. Green. So the average is still the same. If you took up a basket of 25 different numbers and emptied them out on the table and then you did an average, it's always going to be the same, right? But the order in which those numbers fall out of that basket, that's really, really important for retirement planning. So Mrs. Green had 3 really strong years right when she started her retirement. She was able to take out her $50,000 and go all the way through her retirement, eventually have $2.5 million left at age 90, more than double what she started with. Mrs. Red had 3 bad years come out right when she first retired, and she's taking out the $50,000 a year to meet her living needs right all along the way. So 3 negative years right when she started, she runs out of money entirely at age 83. The same average return, the same exact yearly returns, just inverted. Mrs. Green actually had those same 3 bad years at the very end of her life, where Mrs. Red had those 3 bad years at the very beginning of her retirement. You can see dramatically different outcomes. As we sit here today, I'm teaching this class near all-time market highs. We're very close to that. And we've had exceptionally strong markets going back to 2010 with some blips along the way, of course. But if this string of strong markets were to turn on you right when you retired, that could be a big problem. You have to have a plan to manage through that. We use a combined strategy of a bucket scenario for siloing your different investments, combined with a guardrail strategy to determine your income levels. There's many different income strategies for retirees. You've probably heard of this 4% rule. I think there's some big problems with the 4% rule. I've read and studied all of them. The combination of these two strategies that I'm going to go through today, we think give retirees the best upside in terms of maximizing their enjoyment in retirement, but also protecting them to make sure that there's enough money throughout all of their retirement years. So we want to start by identifying what is it that you expect to take out of your savings over the next 5 to 7 years. Whatever that number is, we want to make sure that we have siloed that money an investment strategy that has low volatility to it. Not going to be invested in stock because stock has high volatility. We want low volatility, typically bonds, cash, potentially dividend or low volatility stock, but generally bonds and cash, right? That's really, really important because this is the bucket we're going to target and say, okay, I need money this year. We're going to sell this piece to create the income. The rest of the dollars need to be invested in your growth bucket. Your growth bucket is going to be invested in global stock, US stock, international stock, real estate, commodities, hard assets, those types of assets that have more volatility, but historically have also provided higher rates of return over time. So as you draw down on your safe bucket, you will sell at good times and good prices your growth bucket and refill up your safe buckets or your lower volatility buckets for the next 5 or 7 year period. But say the market was really, really crummy this year, the year after that. We are not going to want to be able to have to be in a position, rather, to sell your growth bucket at a really crummy price to create cash that you need. That's what the income bucket's for. We'll draw down on that income bucket eventually when markets recover. We'll sell at a much better price and refill up your income or your low volatility bucket for that next 5 to 7 year period, ensuring that you always have enough money in low volatility investments to get you through the crazy cycles that markets can sometimes go in, but also making sure you have enough money staying in your growth bucket to provide you for the middle and later chapters of your retirement over time as well. Both buckets are really, really important, right? And most people, they have accounts in all these different places, a lifetime of accumulated pieces. They don't yet understand how are they all going to come together and work, kind of all rowing in the same direction to help them as they move to this next stage of life. Identifying how much you need and then building out your buckets to align with that is really, really key. And of course, the investment selection in these different buckets is paramount as well. So we pair that buckets approach with a guardrails approach to how much money you can take out of your investments. So when you retire, we're going to look at what the aggregate sum of your savings looks like and apply a 5% distribution rate to that. Most people have heard of maybe the 4% rule. Brian, you're saying 5%. That doesn't sound like a lot more. May not sound like a lot more, but it's 25% more money every year than that 4% rule is. A lot of times the 4% rule is going to leave you with a lot more money at the end than maybe you otherwise would have liked. We're not going to hand you a trophy for having the most amount of money at age 90. How do you optimize your retirement for enjoyment and fulfillment, but still make sure you have safety to account for these what ifs in life that, if they did come up, could potentially derail your retirement, like a long-term care concern later on in your late 80s, for instance. So we're going to have your baseline set a 5% distribution on that, and then we're going to establish an upper guardrail above it and a lower guardrail below it. And those are portfolio values. If your portfolio value was here to start, if it breached and went above the upper guardrail, we can give you a raise in retirement. But most importantly, if you breached and went below the lower guardrail because of market decline or extensive withdrawal, we're going to say, all right, it's time to tighten the belt a little bit on your spending. We're going to temporarily reduce your distribution, how much money's coming out, by about 10%. And eventually, when assets and markets recover, and you go back above that lower guardrail, then we're going to reset your income back to what it was. But those temporary adjustments matter a lot. We talked about sequence of return risk a few slides ago. When markets are working against you, even making those small adjustments add up to a tremendous amount of positive value for you when giving yourself enough assets left in your principal for when markets recover and you can go back to taking out what you were taking. So combining the guardrails approach to income and then aligning that with the buckets approach to setting up your investments, these two things together are a really powerful combination that we believe is the optimal strategy for retirees to set themselves up in this transition after they stop working. The buckets and the guardrail strategy, I think you can see how powerful it is when implemented. It's having a strategy and implementing it that really, really matters. If you have questions about what that looks like, what you should be considering as you're setting it up for yourself, use this QR code, book a time with me. I'd be happy to walk you through it and talk about all the things you need to be considering in this next chapter of your life. There are 3 tax buckets that you can have your savings in as you enter retirement. We have your tax now bucket, your tax later bucket, and your tax never bucket. The tax now bucket is your taxable brokerage and investment accounts. It's your checking and savings accounts. Think of the other things that are going to be taxed now and each year in retirement. If you have pension income, if you have Social Security income, rental income, part-time work, all of those things are going to be taxed every year. The vast majority of retirees in America have most, if not all, of their savings in this middle bucket, which is taxed later. Traditional IRAs, traditional 401ks, 403bs, deferred compensation plans. You were not taxed when that money went in. It grew for you tax deferred, but when you take the money out, dollar for dollar, as that money comes out of that investment account, it will sit on your tax return as $1 of income. And so when your income has such a huge impact all across the board from a tax perspective in terms of what you pay for Medicare premiums, what rate your Social Security is taxed at, what rate you pay for capital gains, can you get heavily subsidized health insurance if you retire before age 65, the general tax rate you pay, what tax bracket you're in, all of those things are determined by what your tax return says your income is. And if every dollar that comes out of your savings to fund your lifestyle counts as $1 of income, that doesn't leave you with a lot of flexibility. The last bucket is your tax never bucket when you take the money out, right? That's Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, HSAs. And just because you may not have money in these other two buckets, like tax now or tax never, that does not mean you can't have money in those buckets. There's things that you can do, and we'll talk about it, but how you can get money from where it is today in the pre-tax bucket into a Roth IRA account and do it in a tax-optimized way. And that's the key. A lot of people think, well, I'll just convert the whole thing into a Roth IRA. That's usually not a great idea. You want to have a very specific number that you have in mind because you're targeting a certain level of income on your tax return to hit. And then you can maybe stage Roth conversions out over a period of years. But we'll talk about that as we move through this class today. This is something that's really important to know. I have this laminated on my desk right here. I have it in my conference room. I have it everywhere because it's so, so important. All the decisions that you're making in retirement need to be made aware of how they're going to affect you from a tax perspective. Knowing where you stand in the income tax brackets matters a lot. These are what's called your marginal rates. What is my next dollar of income taxed at? These are your 2026 tax brackets. There's actually a 35 and a 37% tax bracket on top of it, but I wanted to show you this so you can see how it ladders and tiers up as you make more money. Every decision you make in retirement needs to be made with taxes in mind. What this shows you is what is my next marginal dollar of income going to be taxed at, right? That's a really key number to know. If you're in the 32% tax bracket, that does not mean that every dollar you make is taxed at 32%. It's just the dollars that you make if you're filing jointly above $383,900. If you made $384,000, only $100 of your income is taxed at 32%. The dollars below that are taxed in those different tiers that you can see moving back up or down in the tax bracket. So you can see our progressive and ladder tiers as you move higher. There's higher tax brackets above those income levels at 35 and 37% too. I wanted to give you a more blown up version starting at the bottom so you can see kind of how it works as we're moving up in those brackets. If you'd like a tax chart, just let me know. We have a great 2-pager specific to the years this year, 2026, that has those rates, Medicare rates, other things you want to be aware of in the tax code relative to retirees. You may have heard of what's called a Roth conversion. We're a big believer in Roth conversions, the many benefits they can potentially give to people who enact them in a strategic way. What a Roth conversion is taking money from your pre-tax sources, like traditional IRA or 401k, and then moving it into your Roth account. But when you do this, every dollar of income that you do that with is then taxable to you as income on your tax return. You have to pay tax on it, but there's a lot of value in doing it. One, you can lock in historically low tax rates as they exist today. Tax laws are always subject to change, and trust me, they will change. But rates today are historically low relative to the last 100 years. And what if you're at a time of your retirement where your income is low because you haven't filed for Social Security yet? You're living off bank savings or non-retirement investment account dollars, and we can pay 12% income tax on maybe $80,000 of your savings as opposed to paying 22 or 24 or 32% on it when you have to start taking money out. Remember, there's something called a required minimum distribution. When you get to age 73 or 75, depending on your date of birth, the government's going to force you to take money out of your plan, right? Whether you want to do it or not. And you have to recognize it as income. It's a percentage, and that percentage goes up every year. And so when you look out ahead 5, 10, 15 years in the future, what is the impact of RMDs going to be on you? Does it make sense to start putting together a partial annual Roth conversion plan to move this money from a pre-tax place to a post-tax place where you can have tax-free growth and, most importantly, tax-free distribution on all of your gains when you take the money out? From the last slide, we showed you the tax brackets and how the bands are different if you're filing jointly or filing single. What if one of you were to pass away in your mid-80s? The other person inherits the other spouse's pre-tax dollars. They still have to take those RMDs, and they still have Social Security and other income, but now the tax bracket is half the size. But their income situation may not have changed much at all. And so you can be an 85-year-old widow, be paying 32 or 35% taxes on those IRA distributions that are forced on you via required minimum distribution. And legacy planning. These are much better, more flexible assets to inherit for your kids or grandkids. Um, there's a lot of different reasons why Roth conversion for makes sense or could make sense. Doesn't mean it makes sense for you, but it's certainly worth looking at every single year. Does this make sense for me right now? And building out a plan, if it does, to start enacting those. One of the biggest questions we get all the time as specialists and working with people at or near retirement transition is, what do I do for health insurance if I want to retire before the age of 65 when I can get on Medicare? And that happens all the time. That's the value of being a specialist. We're cardiologists, so to speak. We only do hearts, right? If you were a 25-year-old tech entrepreneur, I would point to the CFP that worked really, really well with those people. Generalists are not going to be able to be experts at everything. This tax credit exists. It's really, really valuable. You may have heard of it because it was in the news quite a bit in 2025 when they were renegotiating the tax package. This has always existed post-Obamacare. It was expanded during COVID, and then it's been drafted back. The reality is, if you keep your income below a certain level, you can get a very substantial tax credit that could be worth upwards of $3,100 per month and help bring down the cost of a health insurance plan that you buy on the healthcare exchange, right? The quote-unquote Obamacare exchange. And you can get really good health insurance plans on those exchanges. They run the full gambit. You can get the Anthem Gold plan. You can get the Anthem Bronze plan. They're priced accordingly. But this tax credit can bring down your cost for health insurance by over $3,000 a month. The way that you qualify for this tax credit, it's always based on income, not on assets. We help millionaires qualify for this tax credit all the time, because when you're in control of what your tax return looks like based on the choices you make on where am I going to take my money out of to meet my income needs in retirement, you can control what your tax return looks like. When you take a Roth IRA distribution, for instance, it doesn't show up on your tax return as income. If you took money out of your checking account, that doesn't show up on your tax return as income. So if we can keep your income below these different thresholds, depending on how large your household is, just until you're age 65, you can be saving, again, up to $3,000 a month in health insurance premium. This is real. We do it all the time. It's a huge opportunity for you to retire before the age of 65. And we really encourage you to consider it if you can, because the years when you retire earlier are probably going to be some of the best years that you'll have in your retirement, when you're the most active, the healthiest, when you want to get out and do these things that you really, really want to do, but haven't been able to because of work. When you ask people in their late 70s, 80s, 90s what their retirement regrets are, you hear two things with a great deal of consistency. I didn't retire soon enough, and I didn't spend enough early in my retirement. This is a way to help you unlock both, where you can retire earlier and not have to pay huge health insurance premiums. And you can otherwise use that money to do things like, go on a big trip that you've wanted to do. So there is a pathway for you to get really, really good health insurance before the age of 65 when you start to, again, be eligible for Medicare. So if you have questions about this health insurance strategy, Roth conversion planning, those are great questions to book for this lab session. That's what we call the session, a lab session. Again, you're going to ask me questions. I want to understand more about you, understand what your goals are, where you're at, what you're looking to do. We'll help you as much as we possibly can. If it makes sense for us to meet again, I'll tell you that. If it doesn't, I'll tell you exactly what I think you should do or point you in the right direction so you can get the help that you need. So, how you get that is using your camera, just point at that QR code. It brings you to our booking page. You can sign up for a time slot. We talked about the premium tax credit for healthcare before age 65. After age 65, when you get on Medicare, then we also need to be really concerned with what is your tax return going to say your income is. Whatever your income is, that determines the price you pay for Medicare Part B. It's always the same Medicare Part B, but what you can pay for it can vary dramatically. And so in this example, you make $206,000, you have zero additional surcharges. If your income is $206,001, you now add an additional $2,400 in cost for Medicare that year for the same Medicare Part B coverage. So being aware of what your income is on your tax return in advance of filing will inform you as to what your Medicare costs are going to be and how could you structure where and how you take your money out of your different account types and when can help you control your Medicare costs. This is something you need to be very focused on when you're doing Roth conversions. A lot of times people convert too much in a given year and it really jacks up their Medicare costs. You want to do these decisions in a structured, thoughtful way. And then lastly, we're going to talk about estate and beneficiary alignment. So much of your estate planning actually happens outside of a will. It's how your beneficiaries are set up on your investment accounts, your life insurance policies. Whatever's on those documents, that supersedes whatever your will says. So please, 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 especially if you've been divorced, check your beneficiaries, make sure all of that lines up. Secondly, once you have estate documents, make sure that your financial assets are titled or aligned in a way that match with your estate documents. All the time, people come to us and say, Brian, I have this trust. I say, great, let me see it. What's titled to it? Well, I don't know. I went to the estate planning attorney. I did the trust. But if you don't have anything titled to it or flowing to it through titling on a beneficiary designation or upon death, it's just a useless piece of paper, right? So you need to make sure your financial assets are coordinated with your beneficiary strategy and how your kids are going to inherit these dollars, how you're going to maximize your legacy. All of that comes into play when you're structuring beneficiaries and knowing in advance how all of this is going to work if something were to happen to you. So that's it for our virtual class today. I teach classes all the time that are, about 2 or 2.5 hours that are topics like this, but more fleshed out and more of them. These are just some of the key things that I think retirees should be focused on in 2026 and beyond, because they are really, really impactful. So the next steps would be to use this QR code, book a time with us. Again, it's a 30-minute lab session. I'm going to help you identify what are your red flags, what are your opportunities. What makes sense for you to do? Should you build a distribution plan with volatility protection? Probably, right? We want to manage your taxes broadly across these 3 different buckets annually. Optimize your healthcare costs. Align beneficiaries. These are just some of the steps that you need to do as you approach this transitional stage of your life. Or if you're already retired, it's never too late to be enacting on these strategies. Some people come to my class and say, Brian, I'm already retired. I've been retired for 3 years. I guess none of these things apply to me. Not true. There's so much that you can do. In that person's example, they are still 5 years away from taking their RMD or having to take it. What can they be doing now to reduce that negative tax impact? So it doesn't matter if you're already retired or you're about to retire. There's a lot of nerves and anxieties that inherently exist there when you make this big life transition. And it's really hard to feel comfortable about what this next chapter will look like for you unless you've pre-experienced the future and that you have a much better feel for what the future is going to look like and that you're going to be okay. And how you get that feeling is through planning. I've done this for 15 years. I've helped hundreds of people down this path. So I hope this was helpful for you. If you'd like a longer class, you can reach out to us and we can let you know when it is we're teaching another one. But I think this is a great primer for you as you get ready to enter this next stage of your life.